For more on the meetings and the WTO, I spoke to Arvind Subramanian, Senior Fellow with the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and I asked him how these talks with the WTO are progressing.
The purpose of the WTO is essentially twofold or threefold. One is to open up markets around the world. Second, to create rules on regulation and on trade that everyone adheres to. And three, as a kind of peer mechanism for countries to monitor each other's trade and investment policies. Now, the WTO has been remarkably successful on these scores until very recently. But of late, I think there have been two big challenges to the WTO. One is a kind of a good challenge, and that is that in some ways you don't need the WTO because countries are really opening up their trade on their own, and trade has been booming and flourishing all over the world. So in a sense, you haven't needed the WTO. But the second darker challenge for the WTO is that because it hasn't been able to make progress on the Doha round, it's being challenged by what are now being called mega regional initiatives. So in the WTO, lots of countries get together and negotiate. But increasingly, the United States wants to do business with a much narrower group of countries. And it started the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is dealing with the Asians predominantly. And then the transatlantic, it's called the Transatlantic Investment Partnership, which is with the EU. The US and the EU are negotiating. So these two mega regional deals are, in a sense, undermining the relevance of the WTO.
I agree with you. I look at it as sort of a big party, a big meeting, if you will, where 150 countries come together, and within that meeting room, you start to see fracturings. These group of friends hang out with each other, that group of cliques hang out with each other, and pretty soon the relevance of the entire meeting altogether is in question. How is the WTO going to change that and bring all the groups back together again? Because isn't one of the purposes of the WTO to have a standard in terms of rules for trading?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the objectives. But increasingly, these standards are being set, under regional agreements. The U.S. negotiates with Japan, with Vietnam, with China, and with Europe. So you have very now fragmented rules. Instead of one rule, you have fragmented rules. And that's, in the long run, that's not good for trade. That's why all of us want the WTO to flourish, because there's a kind of common standard. But I think the way the WTO, you should view what is happening in Bali is essentially what they've said is that we can't do very ambitious trade rules for the moment. So let's just do, what's called a Doha Light, which is, agree on a very modest package of reforms. And the main purpose being, one, is to show, first of all, that even amongst these big groups, you can agree something. And second, much more importantly, then talk about how is it that we're going to address the challenge from these other mega regional trade initiatives.
You talk about the Bali round, you talk about the fact that, for lack of a better word, we're bringing the expectations down in terms of what the deal might look like. What does the deal look like right now when we're going to Bali? They're talking in the meeting rooms. They must be talking about this. What does the light deal look like to you?
Well, the light deal just has actually two very, very, very modest items on the agenda. One is what's called trade facilitation. Basically, countries say, we will improve trade, customs procedures. We'll make sure that when goods come in, they can come in easier, quicker, less restrictions, less cumbersome procedures. So that's meant to facilitate trade and make trade happen quicker. So that's kind of the positive side. I think it'll have some very modest gains. But the second big sticking point is agriculture. Some developing countries led by India are saying that they want to existing rules in some ways prevent them from supporting their farmers, their poor farmers in developing countries. So that's the sticky issue now really in Bali.
That was Arvind Subramanian from the Peterson Institute of International Economics.